Hi, have you ever heard the theory that left-handed people are smarter and have higher IQs than right-handed people? So this is a conversation I had the other day with my 11-year-old daughter, and she was trying to convince me that lefties are known to be smarter, have higher IQs, and be more creative than their right-handed counterparts. And she believes this to be true, and she wants this to be true. She strongly, wholeheartedly believes that when she grows up, she's going to be smarter and more creative than her older brother and sister because she's left-handed and they're right-handed. So I thought this was an interesting statement to make. I don't know whether there was any truth to it, so I did a little research on my own, and I found both sides of the argument. I found studies that have been conducted that support her claim, that do indeed prove that lefties are smarter and more creative than their right-handed counterparts, but I also found a lot of studies that have been conducted that disagree with that theory as well, saying that there isn't, much of a difference, there really isn't enough scientific evidence to support that claim, and that there may have been isolated incidences where certain left-handed people have been incredibly intelligent and artistic and creative, but as a population on a whole, it's not necessarily true. And I thought that this conversation that she and I had really illustrated her confirmation bias, because she has a bias towards left-handed people. She believes strongly in this statement, and that she's willing to ignore evidence that would conflict with what she believes in. And that's essentially what confirmation bias is that, we have these different experiences growing up that create our frame of reference. And, we may have been raised a different state, by different parents, had, like I said, different experiences that create these biases, and these biases that we have affect our decision making. I know that I'm guilty of this, so I have pretty strong beliefs about certain controversial topics such as gay rights, immigration, politics, equal rights, and I would imagine I would have a hard time entertaining any arguments that were in support of not giving, gay or the LGBT community the same rights as heterosexuals. I would have a hard time entertaining an argument that was in support of separating the families at the border and putting people in these detention centers. And I also don't agree with white supremacy. I don't think that's a good thing, but I have these biases. But hopefully, as listeners, by the end of this discussion, you'll be able to identify what some of your own biases are and, look back and see, ask yourself, did that affect a decision that I make in the past, and how can I use this information to help me going forward? Because really, when we are able to think logically and not suspend critical thinking, generally that's a good thing. So we're going to take a deeper dive into confirmation bias, because we can break it down a little bit, more in depthly. There's 3 different ways that we can have bias. And then I'll also give you some examples to go with that. So the first bias that we have is called memory bias. And that's when we recall certain memories or incidences that happened, and we're using those experiences to support our argument. So for example, if someone says women are bad drivers, it's a stereotype, it's a blanket statement. And they give you examples of women being bad drivers. So maybe some woman stole your parking spot in the Wegmans parking lot, or she cut you off, or you got rear-ended. So you're recalling these instances, but you're ignoring all the other examples of when women were being good drivers, and you're only choosing to illustrate the examples that support your argument. So obviously, women, the female population as a whole, are not bad drivers. In fact, women have been behind the wheel for over 100 years, so that's not true. We know this, and it's illogical when you think about it. The second type of confirmation bias that we can fall prey to is how we interpret evidence and information. And so, for example, gun control. It's a really controversial topic. It's a hot topic. It's in the news all the time. There's just a shooting in El Paso, another one in Dayton. These mass shootings, you can't get away from the violence. And you're either on one side of the argument or the other. You're either for gun control or you're not. So if you're for gun control, what information are you seeking out? You're probably going to news sources like CNN or CNBC. You're probably watching shows like Rachel Maddow, where she's providing you with information that supports your belief that there should be gun control, and you believe that the government should pass laws limiting the access that people have to some of these semi-automatic rifles. And like I said, you're seeking out information that supports your beliefs. Now, if you're on the other side of the argument and you're anti-gun control, you're probably watching Fox News, probably watching Hannity, and you're probably hearing arguments like, well, it's not the spoon that makes the person fat. It's you're seeking out information that supports your belief that it's your constitutional right to bear firearms, and you don't believe the government should have a say in that. So it's information and how we interpret that, and in the interpretation, you usually use it to support your argument that you're trying to make. The last and final type of confirmation bias we have has to do with evidence, and where we get what evidence we choose to use regardless of its validity. So sometimes, when we're trying to present an argument, we're presenting evidence, the source of the evidence may not necessarily be reputable, or maybe they are reputable. So the best example that I can think of is after 9/11, there was a big focus in America on Iraq and trying to get Saddam Hussein. And in 2003, before we went to war with Iraq, the government led led the world to believe that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And Colin Powell went before Congress and testified that Iraq did have weapons of mass destruction. They had figured out a way to dupe the weapons inspectors, and although no weapons had been found, they were in fact there, and they were planning to attack the United States, again, using these weapons of mass destruction. So we were led to believe by Colin Powell and the U.S. government that indeed this was true. So we ended up going to war, and the weapons of mass destruction were never found, and a lot of Americans ended up losing their lives. So we believe this source, Colin Powell, to be a valid source of information. He presented us with evidence. We believed it, and it wasn't true. So, that's another way that we can kind of fall prey to confirmation bias, is we're using sources that don't necessarily, they aren't reputable, and sometimes in cases they are reputable, we're just being lied to. So these are all examples of, the confirmation bias, the memories, the interpretation, the evidence, and hopefully, going forward, you'll be able to look at, some of the decisions that you've made and see whether or not your bias has clouded your judgment. As far as, confirmation bias is concerned, you've probably heard this statement, I'll believe it when I see it, but with confirmation bias, it's more aptly to say, I'll see it when I believe it. So hopefully you've learned something from this discussion. Thank you for listening, and I hope you survive this excessive heat and the oppressive New Jersey humidity.